At sunrise, an ochre glow spread across the horizon, revealing silhouettes of enormous metal torsos and mangled limbs jutting out from the desert sands. For centuries, these mountainous constructs had lain dormant, remnants of a forgotten age when juggernaut robots clashed in a war that no human could fully comprehend. Now, the only life meandering among these colossal broken machines were scattered bands of survivors, picking through twisted steel as they searched for anything that could help them endure a world ravaged by time, rust, and the half-buried specters of an ancient conflict. Jace crouched at the base of a massive metal hand, its palm nearly as wide as a house's foundation. He traced a finger along the rusted edges, where centuries of wind had eroded sharpness into a sawtooth pattern. The metal flaked away at his slightest touch. He was hunting for usable parts, wires, circuit boards, transistors, anything that might be valuable enough to trade for food and water. Behind him, Sori waited, standing watch with a battered rifle slung across her shoulder. Her dark eyes scanned the ridged horizon of scrap. "Found something," he called up softly. Underneath the disintegrating wrist plating, Jace spotted a sealed compartment, a little panel that looked suspiciously intact. He pried it open with a short crowbar, wincing at the shriek of metal. Inside lay coils of braids, thin wires braided together like a living neural circuit. He reached carefully, mindful of the glass-like shards that had formed where coolant had leaked, infused with sand. The wires looked unbroken. In a world where every bit of technology was scarce, one spool of such wiring could mean a month's worth of water or legumes. Sori's breathing eased, and she smiled for a moment. "That's a good find," she murmured. She scanned again at the horizon. The wind subdued, but grains of dust still billowed in swirling funnels here and there. Ducking under the dead automaton's wrist, Jace tossed the spool of braided wire into a rough canvas sack. "This place always gives me chills," he admitted, carefully rising to his feet. "It's like walking through a graveyard." "Because it is," she replied quietly. "Stay focused." She had grown up with horror stories about travelers who wandered too far into the wreckage fields, never to return. Some said that a few of these metal titans still flickered with life, or that hidden guardians waited beneath the dunes. Others believed that bandits or raiders prowled the labyrinth of twisted metal. Neither explanation made Sori any more eager to linger. They trudged deeper into the graveyard, careful to keep each other within sight. Above them loomed a monstrous torso, half buried, its chest cavity torn open as though another giant had ripped it apart with monstrous claws. Exposed cables and corroded plating formed a hazard of jagged edges, and the gaping wound looked like a cave entrance leading into a labyrinthine stomach. Scavengers spoke in hushed tones about exploring the torso's guts, a place rumored to be peppered with mechanical traps the ancients had left behind. Some found valuable salvage soaked in centuries-old coolant, but others vanished without a trace. A flash of movement made both of them freeze. Sori lifted her rifle, and Jace crouched by a dislocated chunk of plating. For a heartbeat, they scanned the horizon. The haze of dust parted, revealing a figure draped in tattered cloth, moving toward them with a laborious gait. Sori relaxed her aim slightly. The figure seemed unarmed and exhausted. A second glance confirmed it was a traveler, likely another scavenger. The stranger summoned enough energy to shout, voice raspy from dryness. "Help! Please!" The single plea carried an edge of desperation. Urged by concern, Jace and Sori ran forward, rifles and crowbars still at the ready in case of a trick. The traveler collapsed to their knees. Up close, Jace could see their lips were cracked from thirst, their skin raw with sunburn. Sori rummaged in her pack, retrieving a small canteen. She offered the traveler a careful sip. They drank greedily, water dribbling down their chin. The traveler's name, they discovered, was Ren. In quivering sentences, Ren shared that they had been separated from their companion 2 days earlier, when a gang of raiders ambushed them near the spine of a fallen robot. Ren had barely escaped, fleeing into the graveyard to hide. Sori stood and peered around. "Raiders," she repeated grimly. The mention of that word triggered her instincts to move swiftly. "We should keep moving. This open field makes us easy targets." Rin thanked them for the water, voice still ragged, and pleaded to join. Traveling alone through these metal tombs spelled certain death. "I won't be a burden," Rin promised, lightly tapping their own blade, a short but sturdy machete. "I know how to fight if we need to." Jason Sori weighed the risk. Another companion meant fewer potential punishing hours of lookout duty, but it also meant dividing spoils one more way. Yet Sori's intuition told her that with raiders lurking, having an extra pair of eyes and ears might keep them alive. She nodded and Jace shrugged in agreement. They continued onward, heading deeper into the labyrinth, hoping to find salvage that was safe to glean and an exit route, avoiding potential ambushes. As morning dragged into midday, the heat intensified. They made their way around the gargantuan torso, whose chest cavity seemed to beckon with the promise of hidden treasures. Twisted fallen plates created a precarious passage large enough for two people to walk side by side. Once inside, the temperature dropped slightly, the interior cast in tinted gloom. The floor was coated in a layer of dust as thick as a carpet. The pathway led to a labyrinth of corridors, what might once have been maintenance tunnels or interior support structures for the colossal machine. Sparks of corroded circuitry glittered in the shadows. A faint pungent odor of stale air and old machine oils lingered. This was not their first time scavenging a robot's internal labyrinth, but each one held its own hidden dangers. Dead ends, collapsed supports, or entire halls submerged in toxic coolant pools could appear at any turn. They followed Jace, who held a flickering battery-powered lamp. Sori remained close behind, scanning the gloom with her rifle. Ren, still regaining momentum from their dehydration, took up the rear, machete ready. Step by step, they probed deeper into the Titan's belly. Sometimes they had to crawl through narrow gaps formed by torn plating. Each twist and turn threatened to close in on them if the structure shifted. Eventually, they reached a chamber that once perhaps housed an energy core, now long dormant. Metal scaffolding soared overhead, arcing like the rib cage of some extinct metallic beast. Broken cables, as thick as tree trunks, dangled from the ceiling, swaying like vines. Several large, half-intact machines sat along the perimeter, their purpose unclear. Some leftover service drones, maybe. Jason Sori's eyes lit up with the possibilities as they quietly approached the first mechanical shell. Sori knelt by the drone's open side panel, brushing away debris to reveal a partially intact control module. She extracted a multi-tool from her belt and carefully removed small circuit boards. "We can trade these," she whispered, handing them to Jace, who wrapped them carefully in cloth to prevent static damage. Then Sori tinkered deeper into the machine. Minutes passed, punctuated by the echo of their slow, plodding footsteps, as Ren and Jace fanned out to explore other possible salvage. Jace discovered a stack of dusty canisters filled with a congealed fluid that had once served as the drone's hydraulic medium. Useless now, but maybe someone savvy enough could refine and repurpose it. He left them for later. A distant clang startled all three. Jason Sori froze, scanning for movement. Ren stepped near a battered walkway that spiraled along the chamber's edge. "I think it came from up there," whispered Ren, pointing. The walkway was barely stable, and beyond it lay a platform lined with more corroded scaffolding. They crept up the incline, each step groaning under their weight. Rust flaked beneath their boots. The lamp's glow flickered over twisted metal rods that threatened to collapse at any moment. Near the top, the walkway connected to a narrow corridor, and shadows danced across the walls like flickers of ghastly shapes. Listening intently, they waited to hear the noise again. Moments passed, empty except for the rhythmic drip of fluid deeper in the Titan's guts. Perhaps it had been something knocked loose by the wind or the robot's slow structural decay. But then they heard it again, a hollow clang echoing somewhere in the dark. This time it was closer. They raised their weapons. The corridor they had entered branched in two directions. The sound seemed to come from the left. Carefully, Sori stepped forward, mindful not to walk into a trap. Jace followed behind, guiding the quivering beam of light. As they rounded a bend, the corridor widened into a small chamber. Scattered across the floor were bits of torn clothing, a twisted belt buckle, and dried stains. A dread hush coated the scene. Against the far wall, an enormous slab of dented plating leaned precariously, as if something had slammed it from the other side. The three scavengers exchanged uneasy glances. Jace placed his hand on the plating, pressing gently. It moved, pivoting on a broken hinge. Another clang emanated from behind it. They'd positioned themselves. Sori lifted her rifle and Jace and Ren prepared to pry the plating aside. With a heave, they pulled it open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, a battered man with a frightened gaze jerked at the sudden light. He wielded a metal rod, arms trembling as though ready to strike, but seeing the scavengers, he froze in relief. "My name's Tellan," gasped the man, dropping his makeshift weapon. "I got trapped. Some plating fell, blocked the exit." His clothes were torn, caked with blood along one side. "Raiders attacked. I managed to hide here, but I couldn't get out. I've been beating on the metal for hours, hoping someone would hear." Ren let out a shaky sigh. "I thought you were done for, old friend." Tellan and Ren recognized each other immediately. They had been the companions separated in the earlier raid. Renewed vigor shone in both their eyes. Sori inspected Tellan's injuries. The bleeding had scabbed over, but the torn flesh still needed cleaning. She rummaged in her pack for antiseptic salve, applying it gently. A grimace flickered across Tellan's face, though he clamped his jaw shut against any outcry. Once Tellan could walk with assistance, they decided to exit the robot's interior the way they came, fearful that lingering in the labyrinth would invite further calamity. Yet the route back proved more harrowing than their journey in, for the collapsing walkway groaned ominously from the combined weight. Rusted metal shards rained down, and once they emerged into the wider chamber with the hanging cables, the path behind them collapsed in a minor avalanche of twisted steel. In a single moment, the corridor was sealed off. Jace exhaled a trembling breath. "We should get out of this, Titan. The entire structure is starting to come apart." Ren and Tellan nodded. Freedom from the labyrinth overshadowed any regrets about missing out on more salvage. They climbed out through the same fissure that had led them inside, bracing themselves against the metal edges. The daylight outside was almost blinding after the gloom. When their eyes adjusted, a wave of relief washed over them. They weren't alone in that relief. Scattered across a ridge of debris stood 6 figures, shapes etched against the reddening sky, their posture, the glint off their weapons. This was no friendly band of scavengers. Raiders. Among them, Jace recognized a tall silhouette wearing what looked like a patchwork of armor repurposed from old plating. A hush fell over the group. Sori moved first, guiding Tellan and Rin behind the cover of a giant robot fingertip. Jace scrambled behind an upended piece of armor plating. The bandits approached, fanning out with practiced efficiency. When they were within earshot, their leader barked, "Drop your weapons and step out." The air felt electric with tension. Jace's heart hammered. He glanced at Sori, who mouthed, "We can't surrender." If they did, they'd likely be stripped of everything: food, water, salvage, and maybe even their lives. The raider leader gave a solitary chuckle. "Don't make this harder," he warned, leveling his rifle. "We tracked you here. We know you have something worth trading." Sori's eyes flickered. She waited, breath caught in her throat, for the moment to strike. The others tensed. Suddenly, Ren shifted into a new position and the raiders saw the movement. They fired, bullets ricocheting off metal plating. The scavengers returned fire. A staccato of gunshots broke the silence of the graveyard, echoing through the broken giant's remains. Jace's shoulders banged against rusting steel as he tried to make himself as small a target as possible. Adrenaline spiked in his veins. Shots whistled overhead. One raider advanced, bounding from cover to cover, determined to close the distance. Sori took aim. She squeezed the trigger, and the raider collapsed with a strangled cry. Another one returned fire, pinning her down behind the wreckage. Her rifle jammed, and she muttered a curse, struggling to clear it. Rin's machete was useless at this range, so Rin motioned silently to Tellan, who still clutched his side in pain. Tellan understood. They needed to flank. They scuttled along the edges of the robot's twisted horizon, using scattered debris as stepping stones. The raider leader secured a vantage point near a partially intact Titan foot, peppering shots that forced Jace to duck lower. Suddenly, Tellan lurched forward, face twisting in pain. The bullet that struck him seemed to echo a heartbeat later. He crumpled behind an outcrop of steel. Ren stifled a shout and pulled him to partial cover, but it was clear they were pinned. Trapped in the open, Jace had no angle to return effective fire. Sori unjammed her rifle and fired at the raider leader, forcing him to duck behind a battered metal beam. In that momentary lull, Jace sprinted across the open ground, slamming himself behind a chunk of a severed hand with a thud that rattled his ribs. From there he managed to fire at a raider in the open, the shot striking home with a dull thump. The gang's formation broke slightly, giving Ren enough time to drag Talon deeper into cover. A hush reclaimed the field, broken only by the whir of shifting wind around corroded edges. The survivors huddled, not sure if any raiders remained. Jace listened intently. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mixing with the metallic tang of dust. Then footsteps crunched. Sori whipped around. The raider leader emerged from behind the battered foot, rifle in hand, eyes brimming with malice. He raised his weapon, only to see Ren standing several steps behind him, blade in hand. The raider turned too late. Ren lunged in, steel catching the fading sunlight. The machete locked into the gap between the leader's patchwork armor. He let out a guttural cry, dropping his rifle before crashing to the ground in a heap. Ren stood there, chest heaving. The silence that followed weighed heavily. The entire shootout had likely lasted less than a minute, but it felt carved in memory. Sori exhaled slowly, scanning the scene. Of the 6 raiders, 4 lay silent, and the others had fled, leaving any illusions of easy plunder behind. Sori and Jace rushed to Talon, who was still conscious but badly wounded. His breath rasped in his throat, eyes fluttering open as they arrived. Blood seeped through his clothes, staining them a deep garnet. Sori pressed her hands to the wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. Jace found a roll of cloth bandages, and Ren carefully helped bind Talon's side. The bullet hadn't come out, and in these conditions, infection was a grave risk. Still, their immediate concern was stabilizing him if they could. Once Talon was bandaged, their remaining supplies were woefully low. They had water enough for a day, maybe 2 if they rationed strictly. Guns and ammo were nearly spent from the firefight. Sori glanced about with haunted eyes at the graveyard of rusting titans, a never-ending sprawl of shattered metal. "We need to get to a safe camp," she said, letting her arms slump wearily. "Fast." Nightfall descended, but they had distance yet to travel. Steering clear of the labyrinth within the robot, they pressed on, picking their way through the giant's disjointed segments. At times, the rusted husk rose around them like a decaying cityscape. Twisted machine spines jutted into the sky, skeletal forms shaped by centuries of erosion. The ground was pocked with craters from the ancient battle. Sand dunes merged with piles of corroded fragments, forming precarious slopes. Each step threatened to send them tumbling into the unknown depths of ruined metal. Despite the gloom, the group pressed on under starlight, ever mindful of Talon's ragged breathing. Occasionally they paused so he could rest, leaning him against a weathered metal plating. Sori and Jace whispered to Ren, trying to lift their spirits with quiet words of encouragement, but gloom clung to them as tightly as any chain. In the night's deep hush, they reached a vantage point overlooking the desert. The remains of 5 or 6 titanic robots marked the landscape as far as their eyes could see, each distinctive in design, some shaped with broad, tank-like shoulders, others with elongated limbs. All had been shattered, half sunken in drifting dunes. Their broken silhouettes seemed like silent sentinels, reminding any who wandered here that humanity was no longer the planet's chief maker of wonders. Yet not all wonders were lost. In the distance, beside a partially collapsed hillside, a faint glow illuminated the darkness. That was the flicker of a settlement, a place known to some scavengers, a hodgepodge camp perched next to what used to be a submerged Titan's head. Electric lights glimmered, powered by salvaged solar arrays. The promise of safety, or at least a place to rest, filled them with fresh resolve. They navigated the final stretch carefully, fearful of hidden traps or new raiders along the outskirts. When they finally arrived at the settlement gates, 2 guards stepped forward, brandishing makeshift weapons of their own. Sori held up her hands in a gesture of peace. The guards recognized Jace and Sari from previous visits, honest scavengers who always bartered fairly. Seeing Talon's injuries, they waved the group inside, ushering them toward a small infirmary tent. The village doctor was an older woman named Karif, her hair braided close to her scalp. She sizzled antiseptic solutions over a clay stove, took one look at Talon's wound, and uttered a single command. "Lay him down. This will take time." Ren crouched close by, pressing Talon's hand in a show of support. The older doctor's eyes narrowed with determination as she began her work. Exhausted, Suri and Jace slumped against the infirmary's outer wall, waiting. They let the dryness of the desert night soak into them. A battered dog wandered near, sniffing around for scraps, but left disappointed. Before long, Karif emerged again, wiping her brow. "He'll live, if the fever doesn't take him," she said. "I got the bullet out, but we must watch for infection." Thanking her, they offered some of their scavenged wiring as partial payment. The doctor took it with a nod. "Someone around here can repurpose that. We can power a few more lights, or maybe fix the radio tower." Before dawn, the group finally allowed themselves to rest, curling up in the corners of a small shelter set up near the infirmary. Sori drifted into a dreamless sleep, her last thought a flash of the monstrous metal hand they had scavenged from earlier in the day. She awoke near morning, ironically comforted by the distant rumble of the settlement's generator. There was a small comfort in the hum of man-made machinery, still alive in a world of decaying titans. Even as Talon mended, the three others recognized their quest for salvage would soon resume. The settlement offered only meager hospitality, and they would need more trade goods to pay for Talon's continued care. But caution had to guide them. Raiders, structural collapses, and other hazards of the robot graveyard loomed. Rin, grateful to have been reunited with Talon, vowed to stand by Jace and Sori's side. Their shared survival bound them together. One afternoon, Jace found himself wandering near the settlement's perimeter, gazing across the twisted horizon. He spotted the largest titan in the distance, a broken figure so tall that the top half of its faceplate soared high. Even ruined, the sight evoked reverence. He tried to imagine the scale of the ancient war, the unstoppable power behind machines that now lay silent. Perhaps the war had been fought for resources, territory, or ideology. Or maybe it had been a final stand of humanity against an artificial intelligence that had grown beyond its creator's control. Nobody truly remembered. He clenched his fists, remembering how it had felt to scavenge that spool of braided wire, how he'd spoken of ghosts and graves. The mechanical colossi were relics of an era that had destroyed itself, but they also represented what was left of advanced technology. He wondered how many more centuries would pass before the last sparks of that technology faded. When no salvage remained, what would become of the people who eked out a living among these relics? Would they succumb to hopelessness or transform themselves into something better beyond the shadows of ancient wars? Sori approached from behind, placing a hand on Jace's shoulder. "We'll head out soon," she said softly. "We'll find more salvage. Keep Talon alive." Her voice carried a quiet determination that gave Jace courage. Ren joined them a few moments later, machete strapped to their waist. They all turned to look at the broken faceplate protruding from the dunes. The sun highlighted the rivets and cracks along the giant's cheek. It was so vast that in better days one might have believed it capable of snuffing out entire armies. Now it lay blind and silent, a monument to an age lost to the sands. "I'll stay with Talon until he can walk," Rand said. "But if you head back to the Titan, be sure to stay away from any new gangs of raiders." Sori nodded. "We've learned our lesson." They lingered longer, inhaling the dry air. This place, for all its brutality, was still home. And though those metal skeletons had once been engines of death, their remains now supported the living. One spool of wire, one circuit board, one battered servothies, scraps, built the meager future of humanity. Several days passed. As Talon recovered, Jace and Sori ventured into less risky salvage environs near the settlement, gleaning small bits here and there. With every new piece of technology they found, They traded for medical supplies, water, and eventually even a handful of seeds for planting. The settlement's battered fields might coax some life out of the soil yet. Each time they set out at dawn, the towering silhouettes in the distance reminded them of the past's cataclysmic power, but every spool of wire and chunk of circuit board also testified to the survivors' stubborn will. Metal from the Titans could keep the meager lights glowing, keep the pumps for the water well churning, maybe even keep a short-range radio tower functional. Jace's fantasies now included a day when a stronger signal might reach another pocket of civilization. Perhaps, in time, scattered settlements would link together. One morning, Jace and Sori walked down the settlement's main alleyway, little more than a strip of cleared rubble on their way to the gates. Talon stood with Ren beside a welding station, Talon's face drawn but improving. He managed a wan smile. "Safe travels," Talon said. "You two come back in one piece. I don't want to repay you by scavenging gear from your corpses." Jace smirked. "Deal." "Don't go picking through my pockets just yet." Ren gave a small nod of thanks. "We owe you everything," they said simply, then patted Jace's arm with sincere gratitude in their eyes. As the gates groaned open, Sori and Jace stepped back into the desert. The sky loomed overhead, tinged with the pale rose of early morning light. Sand grains rustled at their feet, weaving tiny patterns on the dunes. In the distance, the half-buried Titans waited, silent as always. Rust flaking from their limbs, they pressed forward, eventually cresting a hill of junked plating to reveal yet another vantage of the graveyard. Sunlight glinted off broken edges, forging a stark beauty. Threads of swirling red dust cascaded around the silhouettes of collapsed metal abominations that had once commanded the very land people now scraped through. Sori paused a moment, remembering the chill that had crept up her spine on their very first salvage run. That feeling was still there, ever present, reminding her of the countless souls, human and mechanical, who had fallen here, yet she also felt something else, a sense of possibility. These metal giants, though silent in death, offered a lifeline to those who bravely picked through their bones. Jace adjusted the canvas sack on his back, glancing at her. "Ready?" he asked. She inhaled, steeling herself. "Yes," she said, her gaze drifting to the nearest Titan's outstretched arm. The metals within would buy them food, water, and a measure of security. Perhaps if they were lucky, they would unearth a piece of centuries-old knowledge that might help shape the future. Together they moved on, stepping carefully among the crumpled steel sheets and fractured servos. The wind rose, stirring the dust into curling eddies that danced around the Titan's remains. The Titans! A new day had begun in the graveyard, another chapter of survival in a world built on the rusting bones of mechanical gods. And with each step, the echoes of the past creaked underfoot, a reminder of both ruin and resilience, proof that even among the war graves, life could find a way forward.